If we think we're their persona, we can only accomplish from who we think we are and what other people tell us is possible, and that we also carry with us all the experiences of life that we think defines us. Like we are defined by our past experience, and that's a very limited way to see ourselves. Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. I'm Deborah Burnt Maldonado, here with Dr. Rob Maldonado.
Great to be here.
And we are so excited to continue our series on Jung and Yoga. And before we dive into today's topic, I just want to remind you to subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or any other system you use to listen to your podcasts. And if you are listening to us on YouTube, there's a little button here in the corner that you can click to subscribe to our channel. So please make sure you do that so you don't miss another episode. Now, today we're talking about the concept of the self in both Jung and Yoga.
Yeah, so we started out the series talking about the ego, which is not the true self in either one of those philosophies. Then we talked about the unconscious mind and especially the collective unconscious, which is in yoga philosophy, the universal aspect of Brahman, consciousness, pure awareness. So now we're getting close to the self, right? What Jung called the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious. In yoga philosophy and the way it's explained in the Upanishads, the self cannot be comprehended by the mind. It is beyond mind. So how can we understand something that is beyond the mind? Let's talk about that.
How can we? And I know when I heard the concept of the self, both in Eastern and Jungian psychology, I found it kind of confusing because in a lot of personal development, they talk about discover your true self and understand your true self and express your true self. And the Eastern and Jungian concept of the self is a little different.
Very
if
different.
you talk about the self.
Yeah, very different because in, let's say if you do an internet search and you say, what is my true self? You'll get pretty much answers that talk about this true self as a kind of a polished up personality.
Who lives their full potential.
Yes, who lives their full potential. I like that.
The bright, shiny self. That's you're perfect. There's a perfection in you, that is a perfect person in you that is beautiful, rich, loved and adored by everyone. And that's your true self.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course. That should be all our goal, right?
To be loved by everyone.
To be all those things. No, that's not the problem.
Yeah.
But if we want to understand both Jung and this deeper Eastern wisdom tradition that comes from the Upanishads and yoga philosophy, we have to let go of those old ideas and delve a little bit deeper into what are they talking about when they say the self or the true self. So let's look at Jung first. He's more accessible, more recent, of course. Like we were saying, Jung's idea was that the self is the totality of who you are, both conscious and unconscious. But he's saying a lot there because, as we saw in the previous podcast, his idea of the unconscious mind not only included the personal unconscious, which was is kind of the Freudian concept of a closet that we throw all our junk into.
Our computer program that we can reprogram our unconscious. Yeah.
But it also included the collective unconscious, which we identified as the realm of the gods, this deeper realm that is where everything arises from. And so what he's saying is very similar to the Eastern concept of the self, that it is a transcendental self. Not only having to do with you personally, your body, your history, your personality, but that it is an element that connects you to the universe and even beyond that too.
There's a saying that he says that the part of me that is experiencing, the unknown parts are experiencing me and I'm experiencing that. After the shadow work, you get to experience that all of who you are. And not you, the little ego, but you as a being. You know, there's a being in you that's aware, and it's beyond just your personal memories of, I had this happen to me in third grade, and I had these parents, and this is my relationship history. There's like a universal history that we have, that universal self. But it includes the conscious self as well. It doesn't like discard and say, this isn't like a part of you. Yeah, it is a part of you. The waking life is part of you.
Yeah, so what most people call the self, of course, is the ego or the persona, right? Or we can think of the ego persona as a complex, meaning the internalized part of me, the I that arises in me, or that I experience as that inner voice that tells me you need to do this and that, and you
need to achieve these things.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's the ego. And then the persona is the way I present myself, the role that I play in society, the way I think of myself in relationship to others. That's the persona. Again, nothing wrong with that, but that's not the totality of ourselves. There are these deeper elements that just looking at dreams, we start to get a sense that, oh, there's a lot more going on in my mind than just going to work and living a family life, right? So that's what Jung was talking about. And there's some illustrations of the self as kind of the nucleus of the cell. He says, you can think of the self, Jung says, you can think of the self as the organizing principle in the psyche. It is the center which regulates everything else.
So I liked the term like intelligence within us. Like the body has its own intelligence, that there's different parts of our body, but there's an intelligence that keeps everything flowing. So this happens also in our life beyond just the body, our experiences in life, that there's an intelligence. Some people call that God. But then when you think of God, you know, in the Western tradition of God and traditional religion, it's always something outside of me, you know, some other, like a parent kind of concept that is approving or disapproving of me and can welcome me into the gates of heaven. And so we kind of we feel like we're not that.
Yeah, in some of his writings, Jung actually writes it as God within.
The God within.
Self. In essence, because it is the transcendent part of our psyche, meaning what connects us to the universe. And that's what people have called God from ancient times, right? It's something that organizes life and the universe, the cosmos, the way it appears. That's got to be some kind of intelligence, like you say. Therefore, we are connected to that. At the heart of our psyche is that self, and it is very much us. It is very much who we are. It is the true self, the true awareness in us. Now, why we don't experience it that way, Jung would say, because you're identifying with your persona. You're thinking that little voice and the way I present myself to others, that is who I am, right? So you're reducing your awareness to identify strictly with that persona and saying that's who I am, this body, this individual.
Our limitations, basically, because if we think we're the persona, we can only accomplish from what we think who we think we are and what other people tell us is possible, and that we also carry with us all the experiences of life that we think defines us. Like we are defined by our past experience. And that's a very limited way to see ourselves.
Very much so. So he developed the psychology of individuation, which takes an individual through withdrawing their projections from the world. And so instead of thinking the world is holding me back, it's mean to me, it's hostile, etc., if you understand the deeper principle, you're saying these aspects of my mind are projected outward, and I'm seeing them in others and in situations, but they're really aspects of myself. If I want to transcend them, I have to accept them as part of me. Then I'm able to move forward. So you notice that in his psychology, he's not denying that there are obstacles, that there are kind of resistances in our psyche to becoming the self or to identifying with the self, but that working through them, staying with the very things that we're running from and absorbing them into our awareness is the key to transcending them.
Well, every conflict is reflecting back to us that ignorance, that we aren't the self. And then if we dig into the conflict and see ourselves in it, we start to realize who we are. So if we run away from conflict or judge things like one day, this thing will go away and then I'll be happy one day. No, these things are there as basically stepping stones for you to climb to a different vantage point and see who you really are.
That's right. So moving on then to the Upanishads and yoga philosophy, their sense of self is very similar, but there's some minor differences, right? There's a beautiful term that's Sat Chit Ananda. And Sat is being, Chit is consciousness or awareness, and Ananda is bliss. So what the Upanishads are saying is that if you had to describe the self, and again, the self is indescribable because the mind cannot go there, cannot conceive of it. But if you had to give it a definition, it says this is the closest you can come to defining it. Sat, pure being. And it says it's not that the self is being, it's that the self is beingness itself. It's what lends everything its beingness.
Our beingness is the consciousness.
That's right. But also everything. This cup, the reason it is being in the world, the reason it shines forth in reality is that it is the self is giving it that. It is the beingness of things.
So everything is the self.
Everything is shining forth because of the self, because
and
it's emanating from the self.
You're that self, right?
Yes, and ultimately the understanding or the realization is to get to that, that the core of my being, my beingness is the self, right? The other one, this consciousness, the same principle. It's not saying that the self is conscious. It's saying the self is consciousness itself.
Well, a lot of people confuse consciousness, and we get this question a lot, with being conscious and aware. So this is consciousness meaning more like the formless substance that fills everything. That
like a primordial pure awareness that is allows all things to arise, right, to be. And if we ask, what is the space in which those things are? Like, where is this? What is the space in which we perceive the world and we experience the world? That space is that consciousness, right? That awareness. But it's pure in that if you remove all the things, all the objects, there would still be an awareness there. A primordial awareness that is constant, never changes.
And it's absent of objects, right?
Absent of objects, meaning nothing can burn it, cut it, destroy it in any way.
Can't be wounded.
Cannot be wounded. That's where the idea of non-brokenness comes from in our practice, that it is an impossibility to hurt the self in us. So when people talk about the wounded self or the wounded soul or anything, they're talking about some other concept.
Or the ego.
Yes, some kind of temporary manifestation of
personality
the individual.
and the conditioning from the unconscious, personal unconscious.
That's right. Because the wisdom of the Upanishads say very clearly, the self cannot be damaged by experience, by the objects that arise in that primordial awareness. And then finally, my favorite is Ananda, which is bliss, happiness, right? It's the happiness of being alive. Like, we've all experienced this. We just wake up one day and we're just happy. There's no particular reason. There's nothing going on, nothing that we can say, oh, this happened or this thing happened and I'm happy. We're just content and happy and blissful out of our own nature.
I was telling you this morning, we have these trees because we live on the East Coast now, so lots of trees. And it was raining a little bit, and there was little like drops falling on the trees, and the leaves were just bouncing, and then another leaf would bounce, and another leaf would bounce, and it was just this kind of, it just gave me this sense of bliss, just that kind of pure joy of like the nature of being, in a way. It was so peaceful. And when we have those moments when we watch nature, when we hold a newborn child, when we have a newborn child, or we have something beautiful in our life, looking at beautiful things and feeling love. Yes. Underneath that, we think the source is somewhere in that person or that object, but the source of bliss is actually within ourselves. We're just awakening our own bliss that's been unconscious.
Yeah. So this pure being consciousness bliss is our true self, right? But we can't get at it by insight, because insight is trying to understand, trying to figure it out. Mm-hmm. Now, we do need some insight, of course. We need this higher knowledge. And so it begins by hearing it. The Upanishads say everyone starts with hearing this truth, right? It enters the mind somehow, and we start to think, oh, is that possible? Could we really be this bigger, larger, or expansive self that is pure awareness, pure consciousness, pure bliss? But then it says, then you have to contemplate it. You have to get to the point where you're asking, you're struggling with it, you're wrestling with that information. Now, is this really possible? Mm-hmm. And you're contemplating it, right? You're thinking about it. Then thirdly, it says that you meditate on it. Meaning because meditation is really an altered state of mind which focuses on something and becomes one with it. So imagine
being absorbed in it, right?
Being absorbed with it. So imagine focusing on this truth
versus being absorbed in a problem that you have. You can be absorbed in the truth.
Yes, and reaching that focused, constant flow of awareness that you are this universal self. That this is true. That this is you. That's the purpose of meditation in the Upanishads and in yoga philosophy, that it's the release from the personal constraints of our false identity as ego self.
But without pushing it away, we accept it's just realizing its nature. So I know just working with people over the years, they start judging themselves for having those misaligned thoughts or ego thoughts. And they want to get rid of the ego, and they want to, judge themselves harshly for not acting out of the bliss that they want to. And it's about accepting its nature, that we do have a nature that is ego, that arises because we have a body, and understanding that that's just part of our nature, but it isn't who we are. And as soon as we can understand the mind has a tendency to think like an ego and have an I that emerges and feeling separate. But then there's also the truth, which is that we're one with everything. And so we're constantly trying to come back to that truth, and actually seeing the opposite is the only way we can see the truth. Because if we're in the truth, there's nothing to reflect that's not the truth. And so that's how we realize it. So it's a beautiful system that the self has devised on a level. So what can someone understanding the self, like what's self-realization, like what does that really give someone? Because there's a lot of people that like want to make money and, you know, take all of life that has to offer. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But what is the benefit of doing this sort of inquiry, self-inquiry, self-reflection, and self-realization? What does someone get out of that?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to that question.
Do we have enough time?
But in simple terms, right, in a nutshell, if you want to go beyond suffering, who doesn't, right? If you want to go beyond fear, beyond a sense of meaninglessness, which are all aspects of our ego. So, well, sooner or later, right, if you identify with ego, you're going to be in trouble, because we know this body, this individual formulation of our persona, is impermanent. And
Can't take it with you.
Yeah, so sooner or later you're going to face its desolation. And if you are not prepared, if you don't understand the deeper aspects of your true self, it's going to feel like you've been betrayed by life, essentially, because everything you've worked for, everything you've been given, everything you've experienced is going to go bye-bye. And if you don't have anything else, that's an empty feeling of, you know, what was it all for?
Well, I think that there's this mystery, and we all have this dream, this big dream we have, that one day everything's just going to line up for us. We'll have the perfect relationship, the perfect career, the perfect health, the perfect job, being able to have as much money as we want. Like, there's some state that everything's going to be perfect. And we know that even if we attain everything our heart's desires, it's temporary. Not only because we're going to die, but the world is in constant motion. So there's really, like, you can have, want a child and say, oh my God, that's all I wanted to do is be a mother. But then that child grows up, it's not a baby anymore, it's an adult, and you can't hang on to that little baby anymore. That little kid, your little child is now going to college. You can't hang on to anything. And I think that that in itself, if we just cling on and hang on to those moments as defining us, there's going to be a moment that lets us down.
That's right.
Because it will pass. But the good news is this too shall pass, not only the good things, but the things that are struggling and stress for us also pass.
Yes. So this pure being, consciousness, bliss that we are, it's obtained through self-realization, right? The realization that is who you are. Now, it's not really rocket science, because it's very simple. It's simply saying, if you ask, who am I at the core? Like, what makes me think? What gives me the ability to perceive, to see the world, to feel the world and experience all its beauty and terror? It says that is the self. That you that is asking that question, that is the self. That is that pure being, consciousness, bliss. The reason that we don't believe it is because the senses are overwhelmed by the experience of the world. In other words, we think that the appearance is the reality. So the Upanishads say this very clearly. You mistake the real for the unreal, and the unreal for the real. You think that the color, the form, the shapes of the world that you're perceiving are real, when in reality they are appearances. And we know this, even science verifies this. Perceptual science understands that the colors that you're seeing in the sky, in the world, they're not out there. Your mind is creating them. Your mind is absorbing light, yes, but then it's creating those colors for you and giving you that experience of red and blue and yellow, all this incredible color. Same thing with the meaning and forms of life's experiences. It appears to be out there. The goodness and the badness appears to be inherent in the situations of the world. That's an illusion. Your mind is creating that meaning from within. So if you think that the reality is out there, you're living in a kind of delusion. You're living in that matrix of
Keanu Reeves.
the matrix.
Neo.
Right? You're hooked up to this artificial experience, and you're thinking, I'm living a real life out there. The reality is that self. That pure awareness is the one that's constant, stable, always there, and that you can stand on. Meaning, if you understand the principle and you realize the self, you realize the true nature of yourself, that's your ground of being, and that's the rock that you stand on. And it's immovable because it will never change. It's permanent, it's infinite, indestructible. Now, what is the nature of the world? Completely the opposite. Like
It's
we were saying,
destructible. It's impermanent.
impermanent, continuously in flux, in constant change.
Dark and light.
Therefore, where does insecurity, anxiety come from? From
Pain.
depending on what cannot be dependent on. Putting your hopes and dreams on something that is going to change. And
It's groundless. There's nothing you really can. There's no form. There's no foundation to it.
that's right.
It's like a dream in a way. It falls apart when you wake up, and this world is a waking dream, but it feels real. It feels real. Like if you haven't seen The Matrix, it's a perfect metaphor for what this is about. They studied Eastern philosophy, and this is where they got a lot of their work from. But it's that idea of waking up to and then what it does is it doesn't take away the joy of the world and the beauty of relationships and having children and going for goals, but it actually makes it more enjoyable because you're not putting everything on the ego, this little tiny bubble on the top of the ocean, to work your life where you can rest in the self, which is the entire ocean. You know, you're working with a greater force, and you feel connected to everything. So there could be no lack, there could be no separation, and there can be no loss.
Yes.
And nothing to gain, which makes things fun and makes things creative.
And then one last thing that we'll leave you with, that a lot of people think, well, this is very difficult. You know, when they read Yoga Sutras or look at people that do this kind of work, they
even
think,
individuation.
maybe you can do it, but it takes so much time and effort and intelligence and all that, oh my God, I can't do it, or I don't have the time and energy and effort and all that. But here's the reality of it. You are already that. There is nothing else you can be but the self.
So it's nothing to achieve.
There's nothing to acquire or achieve or get to. You are already that. It's already been given to every single thing that exists in every person that's alive.
You're already enlightened.
They already are the self. You are the self already. It's simply the realization of that. It's all like the removal of the blinders, right? Like taking off the blindfold and realizing, oh, it's been me all along doing all this stuff. So do not let that stop you. Do not let your ego mind deceive you into thinking it's too difficult, it's not for you, etc., etc. You are already that. It's simply your right, your inheritance is the self. It's simply acknowledging that and, saying, I'm ready to accept that.
And that when people think about their true purpose in life, that's really the purpose of life. It's not to find the best career for you. Those are also great to understand your sacred duty while you're here. But to realize the self is really the most empowering thing. And what I love about what we do, we train coaches, that's really what we help people do, is help them realize who they really are, their true divine nature. And that's such a beautiful gift. So those of you who are doing coaching, especially Jungian or teaching yoga, you are doing a great service to humanity by helping people realize who they are. So we will continue next week for another episode. We hope you enjoyed today. And don't forget to subscribe to either us on the podcast or on YouTube. And we'll see you on another episode very soon.
Stay well.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.